Today's guest is Mal Hasty. She is a professional astrologer, intuitive tarot reader, the host of the Witch Church podcast, Highly Sensitive Person, and the Organization for Professional Astrology recently awarded her their most promising astrologer grant. What an honor. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mal.
Yay. Well, I'm always excited. And I know we've done a few things together before on my podcast. And I like talking to you. I know you're a Pisces like me. So I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yes, always feel very at home with the Pisces energy. So yeah, let's start here. What is your sun, moon, and rising sign? And which do you connect with most at this moment?
Well, my sun and moon are both in Pisces, and I'm also a Cancer rising. And I think in a lot of ways, I connect with the Pisces energy the most, just because not only are my sun and moon in Pisces, but I also have Saturn there too. So I really feel like that Piscean archetype is in my life a lot, just as a healer and as a space holder. So that's really what I connect with from my big three.
Yeah, thank you. I guess your Saturn return is coming up then.
Yes, yes. So that's something that's really interesting. A lot of astrologers don't end up going professional before their Saturn return, but I'm a young professional here. So it's kind of funny that I have guided a lot of people through their Saturn return, but I have not experienced my own yet. So we'll see what comes in March 2023 when Saturn moves into Pisces.
Well, you're going to be very well prepared from talking to a lot of people based on their Saturn return. We've talked about my Saturn return together, but yeah, it's a big topic. That's when people need to talk to astrologers, in my experience, about what's happening for me, and just knowing about the Saturn return and what it is can just be so helpful when you're going through that time.
Absolutely. Highly recommend finding your aligned astrologer during your Saturn return period because they will make you feel less discombobulated.
Yeah, very much so. All right, so we're going to talk about lunar natal placements today, and specifically what your natal moon placement means about you and your lifetime. And I'm so into this topic because I am a lover of the moon in astrology. I think probably the moon in astrology is like my favorite part of astrology, and why I love it. Just following the moon and paying attention to what it's doing is something that I just comes so naturally to me, and I love it. But also because I feel really specifically connected to this topic because, like I mentioned to you, I was born on just the day before a total lunar eclipse, or I think maybe a partial lunar eclipse. Either way, born the day before a lunar eclipse. And when I found that out, it was mind blowing for me. It was so interesting. And I just love that little fact about me. It's something that I just think about and carry with me. It made a lot of sense to me. So I'm so glad that you want to talk about this.
Yeah, it's funny because us talking about the lunar phases in the natal chart today, I did check before we got on your lunar phase, and you are absolutely correct. You were born on a full moon Virgo eclipse. So you have that full moon signature in your chart, which we will talk about, but also the added metaphor of being born on an eclipse. It's very intense time to choose to incarnate.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the word, right? That the astrologer at the time, it was one of my very first astrology readings with Eliza Kelly, actually, the queen,
Oh.
years ago when she was still seeing clients, and it was a very affordable rate. I was shocked, but I was, I was getting a reading from her, and she said that, yeah, your experience of your emotions in this life and it is intense, based on this signature. And I was like, yes, I am a eclipse baby in my soul.
Totally. And even for the listeners too, who are like semi astrologically literate, or they have but they still are like, what the heck is a lunar phase? You probably are already familiar with two lunar phases that are very popularly talked about twice a month, and that's the new moon phase and the full moon phase. And there are actually 6 other phases of the moon besides our new moon and full moon. And depending on when you were born, you are born into the meaning or the karma of a certain moon phase. So it can actually be really revealing to consider not only what moon phase we are in right now, but also the moon phase that you kind of carry with you in your lifetime.
Yeah, because the moon is so much about the emotions, the inner world, the energy body, and the body in a lot of ways. It's a huge part of who we are. So, yeah, knowing, I love that you said like chose to come in at that moment, knowing what your soul kind of chose, really does give you a lot of information to work with about what your lifetime is going to be about.
100%. Yes. And it's important to say that a lot of the information that I've collected about the moon phases come from astrologers Dane Rudyard and also Demetra George. And specifically, Demetra George has a book called Astrology and the Authentic Self. If you're listening on my YouTube, you'll see me holding up the book right now. And this is an excellent astrology book, especially for people who are interested in more of the traditional Hellenistic lens. But Demetra George goes through each moon phase in one of her chapters in that book. So she really informs a lot of what I know about the moon phases. But also, as we talk about each of the 8 phases, you'll see that I'll insert some of my own intuitions and my own research about what I've noticed in my clients' lives with various moon phases. But going back to what you said, I feel our souls really choose our chart, and that very much includes the moon phase.
Yeah. Um, can we start by talking about what lunar phase you're born during?
Yeah, okay. It's interesting that you would ask that because I was born during the final moon phase. Sometimes it's referred to as the dark moon phase. I usually refer to it as the balsamic moon phase. So, this is the time before the new moon where we can't even really see the moon, right? In the sky. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through the phases, but I
Yeah.
feel I feel like the balsamic moon phase is pretty intense. It has a lot of, I think, past life karma involved in their
Mm,
lifetime. I
yeah.
think dark moon phase people are a lot of times meeting people that they've already met in a past lifetime and trying to sort some things out. So you could
Wow.
imagine I'm pretty paranoid when I go on first dates. I'm like, "Oh god, like, how do I know you now? What do we have to resolve?" You know?
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I guess we're sort of almost just about in that phase right now at our time of recording this, right? We're just coming up on the new moon in Leo. So we're nearing your natal lunar moment.
Yes, you're absolutely right, because as we're recording, we actually have a really nice, Moon-Venus conjunction in Cancer, and in a couple days, we'll have the new moon in Leo, so we, yes, are in the dark moon phase as we are recording.
Yeah. How do you feel in your body as we're approaching your natal lunar phase?
I like it. I think when we have our natal lunar phase return, which happens once a month, I think we actually feel like we're kind of arriving back home to ourselves.
Mm,
So I would say, as the listeners are kind of, yeah, listening through this and, taking note of what lunar phase you were born under, then you can also pay attention each month and mark on your calendar, okay, when is the gibbous moon or when is the full moon? And how does that relate to my own kind of journey this month?
oh, for sure. I love that. And to be honest, I always do know my lunar return when the moon falls in the same sign in Virgo as it did when I was born. But that lunar phase return is a whole other layer of the lunar return, which we all have one every month, right? So I'm definitely going to mark that on my calendar.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it'd be possible too, since the moon is moody, maybe that would be possible too if you're feeling extra emo, extra moody one day and you're like, God, why do I feel so moody? And you're like, oh, it's the waning crescent. And I was born under the waning crescent. And I think the moon
Yeah,
has a funny way of offering comfort, but also offering discomfort at some points as well. So
yeah. Sure. So we're just coming up on a new moon now. So maybe we can start by talking about, yeah, what it means to be born during a new moon.
yes, perfect. I think that's a perfect place to start. So,
Oh,
if you're looking at your chart, what does it mean to be born on the new moon? Well, that means that the moon is conjunct the sun or up to 45 degrees ahead of the sun. So most popularly, if your sun and moon are in the same sign, you're usually a new moon baby, although you can still be a balsamic moon. It just kind of depends if the moon is before or after the sun. Yeah, so if you notice your sun is in the same sign as your moon, take note, like, is the sun before the moon, and or is the moon ahead of the sun? And if that is true, then you are a new moon baby. So we often hear about the new moon being about the seed that is being planted. So we can think about this metaphor of the seed being planted as almost a lifetime theme. A lot of new moon babies feel that this sort of initiation is kind of sprinkled throughout their whole lifetime. Actually, new moon babies are especially good at initiating new projects or planting seeds when it comes to ideas or things they want to go after. There's a little bit of like a spontaneity a lot of the times with the new moon baby. Like they're just naturally willing to go in the new direction that excites them. It's a little bit like the fool in the tarot, if you will. The thing I found with new moon babies is that although I think they're meant to initiate, the actual follow through and even finishing up on certain projects is going to be their challenge in this lifetime. So if a client comes to me and they say, in the past 10 years, I've had 10 different jobs, lived in 10 different cities, and I've had 10 different relationships, and I see that they're a new moon baby, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. You're so good at initiating and so good at following the winds of your passion that sometimes you forget the art of the follow through or even the art of letting go. So those are some signatures that we can find in the new moon lifetime. I don't know if any intuitive hits are coming to you, Kate, about that.
that's such a beautiful way to sum it up. Yeah, there is that quality of like that cardinal sort of quality of like really good at initiating something and maybe thriving on that sense of newness, like the Fool or like Aries in the zodiac, like that hunger for the new and thriving on that. But I love that you just used the word intuitive, because when it comes to me, when I notice that someone was born on a new moon, I always think about that quality of just like the sun and moon like overlapping in the sky. So the sun is kind of shining a window into the moon or like our unconscious world. So I always think about someone being born on a new moon as having sort of like an access to their intuition or an access to their inner voice that just feels a little bit more strong, or like very self-awareness, I guess, that comes along, or a connection to that intuitive side.
That is exactly correct. I really resonate with that for sure. And even there's like this naive sense to the new moon baby that actually works for them. And I don't exactly know how karma and reincarnation actually work. I'm not sure if we have access to that in the human form, but from what I've kind of gathered just intuitively, I kind of think new moon people are also running into new people. Like, I'm not sure if they're crashing into like very karmic connections that they've had for hundreds of lifetimes. I think there's a lot of just I'm meeting new people, I'm learning from new people, I'm getting energy from newness. So of course, one thing I'll say too is with everything that Kate and I are going to say, it all kind of depends too on the sign your moon is in, and also your aspects to the moon could change. Like, I could see, like, let's say you were born on the new moon in Capricorn and Saturn is squaring your moon. You might relate to what we're saying, but in a different way,
Yeah,
versus being born on the new moon in Aries, trine Jupiter, then you might really be like, oh yeah, that's me. So take everything with a grain of salt.
totally. It's all like little nuggets. Something's going to resonate. But yeah, when I first started learning about astrology and really like at the moon sign and more about my moon placement was like really the second thing that I learned about, and I think a lot of people learn about next to the sun sign. So yeah, it's all about sort of just collecting, like, oh, I learned about my moon sign and what that means. I learned about maybe what the phase means and maybe different aspects. There's so many different layers, but it's all about just the nuggets that you can really keep and just yeah, not forcing anything when you're just learning about new topics in astrology because it's the universe we're talking about. It's big, right?
Exactly, exactly. And as the moon signs really teach us, like we all have our own karma that we bring into this lifetime. And
Yeah,
sometimes that karma or those soul contracts cannot be completely spoken to just from like a textbook that we're reading. So
totally.
yeah, yeah. But okay, so if that's kind of the gist of the new moon, and then as you probably know, after the new moon comes the crescent moon. So this is kind of the in-between point from the new moon to the first quarter. We have the crescent moon that's kind of sandwiched in there. And that's when the moon is 45 to 90 degrees ahead of the sun. So this is when the seed of what we planted is starting to grow roots and starting to crack through the ground. So sometimes I think there's a little bit more of a struggle with this lifetime. Not to say that it's more filled with suffering than any other phase of the moon, but if you really think about the seed struggling through the ground to break through the soil, a lot of the times I think crescent moon people might even have some kind of circumstance in their childhood, especially earlier in life, where they really have to like break through the soil and find some point of like self actualization. So there might be a struggle, again, especially with early in life, struggle with the external environment. Something in their external environment kind of acts as a block. It could actually be their parents wounding, or maybe even their location, or something along those lines really
Mm,
feels like a block. And there has to be this moment. Maybe it happens when they decide to leave the nest later in young adulthood, or, something happens where they really have to break through the sort of wall that was built up within their childhood. So I think the lesson in the crescent moon is kind of more about believing in yourself and believing that you do have the power to change, especially things like family patterns, and knowing that the environment that you were born into, can be changed by you and your use of your own free will and self actualization.
wow. I love that you're using the analogy of the seed coming up because that's such a beautiful expressive way to talk about how the moon phase, the cycle kind of evolves. Yeah. And during that crescent moon, when energy is building from the new moon leading up to the first quarter moon and then the full moon, it's like energy is building And I always think about that period just in working with the lunar cycle in my own practice. Like that phase gives us the energy to push on through. It gives us the sort of like headstrong teenager coming into my own in some way, like crushing through obstacles. And yeah, I love that as sort of a lifetime lesson of that placement. Like I have the stuff to do this, and it's up to me to push through and believe in myself.
Yeah, yeah. And here's a celebrity chart example of a crescent moon person that I think really actually speaks to this phase quite well. Britney Spears. If we think about it, she was born into many external pressures and circumstances. She was born into a very karmic relationship with her father, where that kind of continued long into her adulthood, through her whole conservatorship story. And we see this moment in her lifetime where she really had to find her own voice and break out of the kind of binds of how her family environment was controlling her. So I think that, I mean, there's other things in her chart. She has very strong Pluto stuff, and Pluto can really speak to power dynamics in this lifetime. And certainly she's had a lot of power dynamic struggles. But I do really see her kind of trajectory as very crescent moon.
Yeah, that's a really interesting note. She's an excellent example of that. Just crushing obstacles left, right, and center.
Yes, yes, definitely. And I love what you said about the angry teenager. Because I actually think, I mean, it's not that people with crescent moons are always angry teenager vibes, but that could literally be something that they experience, like the
Uh,
angry teenager trying to psychologically separate from some kind of obstacle that's been in their path.
yeah, yes, yeah. I love that quality of just I rebel a little bit or prove myself or prove my reality coming into my own.
Right, right. And the one more thing on the crescent moon, some crescent moon people won't or will really struggle with that. I'm proving myself, I'm standing up for myself. Like they'll really struggle with setting the boundaries or finding their inner voice in order to say, like, no, like I'm not doing that. Like, or like, no, that is not who I am. That's actually the whole struggle of the crescent moon. So
Yeah, yeah, makes total sense.
yeah, and then of course after the crescent moon we approach the first quarter moon. So at this point the moon is about 90 to 135 degrees ahead of the sun. And as we know from like moon theory, like the first quarter moon is often about like when the roots of the seed actually start to grow into the ground. There's some kind of rapid growth through the soil because, again, once the leaves kind of actually break through the soil in the crescent phase, then they can actually get access to the sun. And once they have that photosynthesis, there's this rapid growth, and that is the
Mhm.
first quarter moon. So these people in this lifetime are really builders, I think, in a lot of ways. It almost is reminding me of like the Three of Pentacles in the tarot. Like these people are very skilled at figuring out what foundation needs to be built to support even further growth. But they're also experiencing the trials and tribulations of actually laying the foundation down. And in this lifetime, they're kind of figuring out not only how best to overcome obstacles, we're all doing that in some sense, but they're like the strategizers. And they're also learning a lot about the art of making wise decisions. Because if you think about it, building a foundation is just a bunch of layers of decisions that we're making. And they're kind of learning like, like one decision that I kind of like didn't think about. Now my whole floor is cracking in because I just willy-nilly said yes to that decision and now I have to go back and redo it. There's a lot of that in their lifetime, like metaphorically, like, oh gosh, like, okay, that just kind of made my foundation unstable. Now I got to go back and see what I can do here. So they're really developing a lot of problem solving skills and decision making skills in this lifetime.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, yeah, how have you felt like with this first quarter moon phase as you've kind of observed the lunar cycle each month?
Yeah, good question. So I always feel like with the first quarter moon, we're kind of at the point of seeing a little bit of maybe feedback come in from whatever began with the new moon. We're sort of in the position to, see some results, what is taking off, what's not taking off. And we're kind of dealing with what is at this point and being like, okay, so I'm in this kind of almost like sorting the crops moment where I see what's coming in and I have to say yes or no to something now. And I have to say, like, yes, more of this. I want to nurture the growth of this. And you know what? I don't really like where that's going. There is that experimentation, sort of like building energy, a very creative phase.
Yeah. Oh, and I definitely love your keyword being feedback. Because, yes, the first quarter moon phase is about really listening to feedback that the external world is giving you, not necessarily people, but just like, okay, yeah, like my foundation just cracked under that storm. Like, what information is that giving me?
Uh,
And how do I look at it from a neutral perspective? Because sometimes the worst thing we can do when we're foundation builders is to overly emotionally attach to sometimes what we're building, because then those emotions might keep us from even repairing something that needs repair. It almost reminds me of like a game show, or like a competition show, sort of like a Shark Tank or something like that. That is very first quarter moon-esque. Like, I built this, I'm bringing it to like a panel, and they're going to give me feedback on what I've built. Like that feels very first quarter.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Like feedback, maybe a little bit of like being judged or judgment. And yeah, that lesson of not taking things personally or not going to a place of like, oh no, I suck because this foundation cracked. It's like, no, I can change this now. And this is all the feedback that I need to make a necessary change.
Yes, yes, precisely, precisely. And then like once the moon even starts to grow past the first quarter, then we're kind of at the in-between point between the first quarter and the full moon. And that brings me to moon phase number 4, which is the gibbous moon. And that is when the moon is 135 to 180 degrees ahead of the sun. And this is kind of when it's almost like it's not that the growth has stopped, but the rapid growth of the first quarter has kind of slowed down. And it's almost like the plant is reaching its young adult phase, where the plant is almost full grown, the leaves are there, but it hasn't quite like blossomed its fruit yet. That will actually happen in the full moon. Um, but I find that I think gibbous moon people are here to almost refine the project and see the project from a more zoomed out perspective. They're almost working towards giving the structure a meaning. They might not be sure of the meaning of the structure, but they're trying to figure that out. And it kind of reminds me, I think like a gibbous phase, quote unquote, of my own life was maybe like a year or two in to like building my own business. I started to ask myself, like, well, who's my ideal client? And I didn't really know the answer to that. And I really had to think about, like, okay, well, who's my client? Like, Are they the highly sensitive person? Are they the entrepreneur? Are they the space holder? Are they the therapist? And that's kind of what we start to ask ourselves in the gibbous moon phase. Like, we start to perfect what we have been building. And I also think there's something about the gibbous moon phase. People, the people born under the gibbous moon phase, they're very good at self improvement, sometimes to a default. Because remember, it's their whole job to like look at the picture and be like, okay, does this have meaning? Like, is this how I want it to be? A celebrity chart example of the gibbous moon is actually Tyra Banks. And I know she's kind of a bit of a problematic person in a lot of ways, but also I think she's a good example of gibbous moon person because she did start out in modeling and she did a lot when it comes to breaking through the confines of like the traditional modeling world, her being a Black woman. And I think at some point, like a really curvy Black woman, who a lot of the modeling world wasn't used to that type of figure, right? But that wasn't the whole story of her career. Like, even after that was over, she then creates America's Next Top Model and like starts to give even more meaning to what she had already created. She
Mm,
starts to like ask questions and kind of challenge the modeling industry as a whole with this show. Granted, again, was she at times problematic on the show? Sure. I mean, believe me, I've watched the whole thing 20 times. It's one of my favorite reality TV shows. But that's just kind of a general example of like, okay, what is the gibbous moon really doing? I hope that makes sense in some way, Kate.
oh yeah, that's an excellent example of just that evolution, constant evolution and perspective. And oh, this is kind of the way that I've broken through, or this is what I've created. And now I'm, getting a sense of what meaning does that have and building meaning on top of that. It's like just, I guess, like a further evolution of like the foundation, right?
Yes, exactly. And also, you being born like the day before the full moon, you're almost technically on like the
Yeah.
moon phase cusp. And you would actually maybe even resonate with parts of the gibbous moon meaning.
Mhm.
I would think because you're born, I think a little bit more towards the full moon than the gibbous moon, you'd probably resonate a little bit more with the full moon's meaning, but still, like, I bet you can see parts of the gibbous moon meaning in your own life.
Totally. And the way that I think about that is sort of this sense of, and how this manifests in my life, being kind of in the middle of those two phases, is sort of this sense of like building anticipation leading up to the full moon. It's like the curtain's about to raise at the full moon, which is like the outpour, the clearest moment, the highest energy part of the lunar cycle. And like just before it, we're like getting ready, we're getting the stage ready, we're getting the costumes ready, we're getting all the actors ready. That sense of like almost kind of like, yeah, building anticipation or just like heightening energy.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And I can totally see you doing that because I feel like you're the always the person that I see on my on my social media stuff who like reminds me that something is coming up. Like you'll remind me, and this is bad because I am an astrologer, but sometimes I forget like what's kind of happening. When you're so in it, you sometimes become removed from it in a lot of ways. So I'll see one of your posts and you'll be like, "Oh, the full moon's coming," and I'm like, oh, the full moon's coming. Like, Kate just reminded me. Like, so
Totally. Oh my God, I love that. Yeah. Well, there's so many, it's funny, like there's so many different transits that are just happening at any given time. And what's big or on someone's mind may not be what's on someone else's mind, right?
exactly. Yes, very much so. And maybe that's the perfect bridge to the actual full moon phase.
Mm-hmm.
And we think the exact full moon happens when the sun and moon are 180 degrees apart. So that's kind of the beginning of the moon crossing over that 180 degrees and then coming behind the sun. So mathematically, we could say the full moon phase is any time the moon is 180 degrees to 135 degrees behind the sun now. So metaphorically, the full moon is about when the flower is like blooming. It's like the dun 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 point of the lunar phase. Like what we have building is now coming to fruition. A lot of astrologers, I think including Demetra George, uses culmination as a key word for the full moon phase. However, like I kind of said in the beginning, the full moon is fundamentally an oppositional aspect. It's two planets, the sun and the moon, at a 180. And oppositions in astrology actually teach us about relationships and relating to others. Oftentimes when we do have a strong oppositional aspect in our chart, it's possible that sometimes that energy isn't necessarily even about us, but what other people are bringing to us. So I'm thinking about the full moon lifetime. Relationships are going to be especially important, not necessarily strictly romantic relationships, but just building relationships in general and really getting into that lover's card frequency. Like, what is this person mirroring back to me? What am I learning from this person? I think this makes a lot of sense for you, Kate, in the sense of you're doing client work a lot. I know even as a practitioner, it's very hard to ignore our own issues because we will come to session and someone will have the exact same issue that we're having, and then we're kind of doing a reading on it. And even, tarot readings oftentimes happen at a 180-degree angle. Your client is sitting exactly across from you at the table, which is kind of like the full moon. So we're really kind of seeing examining our relationships in the full moon phase, and we might even be illuminating something, not only about our project that we've been working on, but we might be illuminating things to other people in general, and some people don't like things to be illuminated to them. So potentially full moon people may find that they can sometimes trigger people, or say things to people that they weren't ready for, because they really are the ultimate truth speakers in a lot of ways. What are you picking up on about the full moon phase, Kate?
Yeah, really interesting that you use the lovers card as well as that sort of energy of um just to express like the duality aspect of that opposition. Like it is in essence an opposition, and we don't often think about a full moon as being like the sun opposite the moon. Well, maybe we do, but it is about relationships essentially, and balance. Like I'm balancing two parts of me, or two seemingly disparate energies, and like just really something needs to be released in order to find that balance, and or balance, like, yeah, two parts of me that just seem very opposite and come into a new balance.
Right, definitely. And I've seen people who are full moon babies. This isn't everybody, but I've seen some people in that full moon phase say things to me like, my parents didn't have a healthy relationship, or no one in my family has ever kind of had a successful relationship, or I really struggle with finding someone with similar values or whatever. Like, again, that does not have to be every full moon person's struggle, but oftentimes early in life there is this theme about relationships that is revealed to them. Maybe it is their parents' divorce, or maybe it's some story they heard about their grandmother being a lesbian, a secret lesbian, or like there's something, I don't know, like there's just something there about like what started to be collected about relationships, especially in like the formative years, and how we might carry that through our lifetime, and maybe even the patterns that were meant to sort of adjust in this lifetime.
Totally. I love that as like an essence of that lesson. And I guess more generally, being born quite close to the full moon, I always just think about that in general as being it is the culmination, as Demetra George said, of the lunar cycle, right? When, the moon as a symbol of our emotions, it's the biggest, the brightest, the boldest that it gets in the sky at the whole 29.5 days. So it's like we are, if you're a full moon baby, kind of walking around with that experience of life all the time, like big emotions, right? Like wanting to express maybe, or kind of like, that sense of like maybe, reflecting things back at people or having things reflected back at you and just responding to it in a way.
Yes, yes, precisely, precisely. And we might think like, okay, the full moon is the culmination point. So why do we have three moon phases after the culmination point? Like I thought this was the end. But as we kind of learn with the metaphors that even astrology or tarot can present to us, the culmination point or that peak point isn't actually the end. There's
Yeah.
always that kind of downward slope that takes us into the next cycle. So we could almost think of the next three moon phases, the disseminating, the last quarter, and then the balsamic. These moon phases are kind of now about wrapping up things. And I think they tend to be a little bit more karmic in the sense of who we're relating to in this lifetime, and maybe tend to be I don't want to say like more intense than the first four, but there's just something there about it's sort of like how the zodiac signs kind of progress, like how Aries is kind of like the baby and then Pisces is like the old grandma. Like it's kind of like that we're talking about right now. So after the full moon, we come to the disseminating moon. And that is when the moon is 135 to 90 degrees behind the sun. And I was actually thinking, I'm like, what does disseminating actually mean? So the literal definition of disseminate is to spread widely. And I think that's actually perfect because if the full moon is when our flowers kind of bloom, the disseminating moon is almost like our fruit is here. And now we're picking the fruit and disseminating it or spreading it widely to the community. We're bringing the harvest to the community. So I think the disseminating moon person is sometimes in a lot of ways focused when it comes to bringing um, kind of like giving back to the world in a larger way. They might find that from their youth, pretty early on, there's some kind of, I have to help others or I have to make a difference in my community. Like this is like the little kid who's has a lemonade stand but is going to give the money to like the local donation center or something. Like there's just a little like I'm going to save the world thing I think going on with the disseminating moon. But if you think about it, it makes sense because they're picking the fruit, they're harvesting the fruit and they're giving it to the community. So I think in this lifetime there's some kind of underlying message of what am I giving to the community or what how am I helping others? And there can be quite a crisis moment, I think, for the disseminating moon if they don't feel like that purpose is clear. And you may know as like a helper person, Kate, like, yeah, like we would probably feel pretty lost without that kind of light. So there could be some times in the disseminating moon's lifetime where they feel a little bit lost, like I need to give, but I don't know what I want to give. That can definitely be a kind of thing that they can feel in a lot of ways.
Right. Like I have the energy to give, the drive to give, but maybe, need a little bit of support with the focus, or that doesn't come so naturally, I guess, right?
Yes, yes. And celebrity chart example of a disseminating moon We actually have Dolly Parton being kind of on like the full moon, disseminating moon cusp. And I think that's kind of funny because what is Dolly Parton famous for? Well, she's a famous country music singer and someone we all know and love. But also during the beginning of the panini, she funded one of the vaccine, the COVID vaccines. And I think that's such a disseminating moon thing to do. Like that had ultimately nothing to do with her career path in country music, but she still used the resources that she had gained from that kind of lifetime to give back to the community in a lot of ways. And I think that's part of her focus in this lifetime. And I believe she has a lot of Capricorn and Virgo in her chart, kind of like you, Kate. So it makes sense that she would maybe be focused on how to give back to the community in a bigger way. She also is pretty vocal about being like anti-racist in the country music industry, which is sometimes not the most popular platform that a lot of country music singers take. So
Yeah, that persistent quality of like longevity and being a provider, like Dolly Parton just keeps giving and keeps evolving, right?
right. And she kind of feels like she's never going to die. What is that? What is that word? When you're she's like, yeah, she's like forever living. So that's kind of like a disseminating moon thing too.
Maybe that is a quality of that striving for a legacy, striving for the creation of a legacy. Just going back to that analogy of the plant coming up, I think about maybe the plant at the disseminating phase is sort of like letting go of its chaff or fall, like dropping its seeds onto the soil to turn into compost and regenerate and give rise to the next sort of phase. So we're sort of like that quality of thinking forward to the future, like what am I giving back and what am I creating, what's my legacy.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think there's something about once we move into the third quarter or last quarter phase, this is when things might start to get kind of shadowy in a lot of ways because again, like a full moon, like we have some kind of culmination and then disseminating, we're giving back like through that culmination. And now we get to the third quarter new moon or the third quarter moon phase. And this lifetime can be a little bit like, now what kind of lifetime. It can almost be a struggle for meaning after we've already found meaning. If anybody's ever had the experience of like accomplishing something really big, like a really big goal that they wanted to accomplish, and like you thought that that was it and it was going to be like the moment, but then that moment passes and you're like, now what? Like, my life is meaningless again. And we kind of have this realization that maybe our accomplishments, it's not that they're not meaningful, but we just have this kind of realization that time passes regardless. That's a little bit of the sense of the third quarter moon. So the crop has been harvested. There's no more fruit on the tree. And if there are still fruits sort of hanging on the tree, you're right. They're starting to rot. They're starting to drop to the ground. So there's a little bit of a letting go theme in this lifetime. And I think third quarter people sometimes are kind of making peace with what they have accomplished and even making peace with letting go of old parts of their identity. There could have been a part of their life where they were known as like, oh, like the big salesperson in this company or the top surgeon at this hospital. But now it's sort of like this, well, who am I without that? It's weird that sometimes our lifetime again is focused all on a singular accomplishment. And then once we accomplish that, we almost have like an identity crisis in some way. So it's almost like in a weird way, their job to detach themselves from identity in itself. Like, like they're almost kind of reaching more of a oneness with the universe. Whereas if you think back to the very opposite moon sign, which is like that phase right after the new moon, the crescent moon's all about developing the sense of I, developing the voice. But now we're at the opposite. And now this is actually more about letting go of the identity. So I think that might actually be a little bit different when it comes to how we describe the third quarter moon in general, because I've heard and I've described the quarter moon as like the final challenge a lot of the times. But it shows up a little bit differently when we're talking about, I think, the grand scheme of someone's lifetime.
Yeah. And what's in my mind when I hear you talk about this phase is just like the energy of Scorpio in the zodiac. We're nearing the end of the zodiac where we're sort of dealing with that quality of death and needing to transform, needing to peel back layers and reinvent ourselves. So maybe that's a lesson as well of the people born during this phase, the last quarter phase, like constantly kind of reinventing myself or based on a reflection of what I am no longer.
Oh, 100%. That's such a great point. And that kind of goes along with the themes of the chart of Oprah, which is the celebrity chart that I have for this moon phase. And if you think about Oprah, like she really is the perfect example of the last quarter, because you know, at this point, she's like the cliche of a successful person who made a difference in, many, many, many people's lives. Yet recently, in the past like couple years, we saw her come back and do an interview with like Meghan Markle and Prince Harry about kind of exiting the royal family and stuff like that. And it was still like the most watched interview in the history of time, which is like very last quarter moon person. Like they're just so famous, they can't help it. But then at the same time, there was something about like seeing Oprah doing another interview when she had already closed that chapter in her life. Like her show has been over for a long time. And it was a little bit like bittersweet. And I'm sure I don't know her as a person, but I'm sure she has had to grapple with this, like, who am I when the whole world perceives me as this thing? Well, who am I really, you know?
Mm, yeah, what an excellent example of that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, if you are a last quarter moon, this is one of the harder ones for me to grasp at times. So yeah, feel free to DM me or even Kate and give us your life story, because I could use some more examples of this one for sure.
Yeah, but I love that energy of almost like, how can I top that? Like Liz Gilbert after Eat, Pray, Love. Like, how can I top this? Like, I do I just start drinking gin at 10 a.m. or do I continue to find reasons to, continue creating and remember, remember who I am and remember why I do what I do. Always going back to the essence of what I love.
Exactly, exactly. And it makes a lot of sense now. Like after the third quarter phase, then we enter the darker phase of the moon. And that's when the moon is at 45 to 0 degrees behind the sun. So I call this phase the balsamic phase. I think a lot of people end up calling it like the dark phase of the moon for obvious reasons. We literally can't really see the moon during this phase. It's when it's building towards the new moon again. So this is when the seeds have all fallen to the ground. You kind of mentioned this metaphor earlier, Kate. Like the rotting fruit has decomposed, the seeds are replanting themselves into the ground and now starting to sort of I don't think germinate's the right word. They're starting to gestate for the next cycle. So people born during the balsamic moon phase typically have a very karmic lifetime, potentially the most karmic out of every moon phase, because if you think about it, they're born with this signature of the ending and the beginning. They're born with this kind of liminal space kind of thing. So it is very possible for balsamic moon people to be running into like, past life people. Like I'm a balsamic moon person, as I mentioned at the beginning. And I truly believe that I think my parents and I have been together for many lifetimes. I think I've been in relationship with people that I needed to break a pattern with from a past lifetime. I don't mean to sound like a twin flamer because I'm not like I don't throw around those words.
Yeah.
but hopefully it's not sounding as fluffy as that. But I also believe truly that some of my clients are finding me again. Like I do think that I've worked with some of my clients before this lifetime in some way, shape, or form. So I particularly think it's a karmic lifetime, but also balsamic moon people tend to feel a little bit more like they're on the outside. They tend to feel like maybe a little bit black sheepy, like an outsider. For me, this kind of has manifested as like I guess being an old soul in a lot of ways, but also just being young and hearing people who were older than me discuss their lives and me kind of being able to recognize even as a young person that like there was something out of alignment or they weren't doing it for the right reasons or there was just some kind of thing that they were working through that they weren't quite aware of. And I'm not trying to paint myself as this like all aware being or anything like that, but I did recognize that as even a young person. Like there were just some feelings of like, I don't know about these adults. Like, I don't know if they know what I'm seeing here. So that can definitely be an experience of
Yeah.
the balsamic moon person.
Wow. Yeah, you're clearly such an old soul to me. And I'm yeah, that you mentioned that analogy. Yeah, that makes total sense. I love that. Um, why do they call it the balsamic moon? What's the reason for the word? I literally have no idea.
That's a really good question. I don't know either, and you're making me want to like look up the etymology of that word. Because yeah, we think like, well, what's with balsamic vinegar and like why is that the word for the moon phase and all of that? So I'll have to look more into that. But yeah, it's a mystery to me.
Yeah, yeah, there must be some connection. And I mean, by the time this podcast goes live, we'll both have figured it out, and then we'll be
Yeah.
like so naive to not know. But
Yes,
anyways,
yes, totally. So yeah, balsamic moon people, you have to, be really gentle on yourself in this lifetime and
yeah,
yeah, give yourself some grace as you work through some of these older karmic patterns. And the ultimate lesson for the balsamic moon person is kind of like letting go and letting the cycle complete itself.
mm,
And that can be really painful, especially if we're cutting energetic cords with someone that we've interacted with a lot, not just in this lifetime, but again, in past lifetimes, that can be a really difficult thing to let go. But I also very much believe in our letting go powers, balsamic moon people. So I have faith in us.
I adore that. Yeah, right at the very end of the cycle, we break the cycle and we allow a new one to start. So
Exactly.
beautiful lesson. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was so interesting and so helpful. And I could literally just talk to you for a billion years about these phases. And there's so many other layers that you add on, like the moon sign and how each phase expresses in the sign and in connection to the sun. And there's so many layers that you can take it. But I know that we've given the listeners a lot of food for thought to take away. So thank you.
Yes. And one last thing I'll add too, since not all of our listeners will be astrology students who are like looking to do the math of their moon sign and everything, I actually did some Googling before this episode and I was like, what is a good way for like a beginner to find their moon sign? And if you actually just Google, I think it's Astro Style. Yeah, if you just Google Astro Style moon phase, the first article that comes up on the Google search is which moon phase was I born under by Astro Style? And I did test it out, and it seems like a pretty credible site which gives you your moon phase. So if you want to look up that further, that's my recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'll link that down below. The twins, the Astro twins always have a resource for us.
Definitely, definitely. I am a truster of the Astro twins. So yeah, go to their website and they have a little thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. So before we wrap up, if you're open to it, I would love to pull a tarot card for you to just offer you some guidance, maybe around a question that you have, or we could just do a little general check-in with the universe.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, for sure. What a treat. I would love like anything that comes through. So
Okay. As we approach your lunar phase return. Okay, we'll see what needs to come up for you. Oh, we have the Ace of Pentacles coming up for you. So as we approach your lunar phase return, we're so close now to the new moon at our time of filming this. We're 2 days away from it. This is a really beautiful time for you to think about the fresh starts that are pressing for you, maybe coming up from your inner world. What do I want to create in the world? What seeds do I want to plant next? Or recommit to really nurturing the growth of with the Ace of Pentacles. Yeah, I always think about that new moon quality of planting a seed, right?
oh my gosh, yeah. And even as that makes so much sense with the fact that spirit gave us literally like the seed card, and that's like the metaphor we've been using throughout this entire episode. But I was literally just thinking about how my description of the balsamic moon about like letting go and blah blah blah, like it really does relate to a lot of my life circumstances right now. So I think that Ace of Pentacles is really reminding me of the fruit that can come from letting go and releasing.
Yeah, clearing the way for the fruit to emerge.
Yes, I love it. Oh, well, that was such a gift. Thanks so much, Kate. And I just know this episode will be a great resource for a lot of people right now and even beyond.
Yeah, a timeless one for sure. Bookmark this. Bookmark
Yes.
this. You'll turn to so tell everyone where they can find you, and if there's anything that you are like sharing with the world right now that you want to let people know about, please feel free.
Totally. Well, if you identify as a highly sensitive person, I have a couple HSP things that are coming up this fall, especially if you are looking for a container with other highly sensitive people to offer you support. Keep an eye out for that. And you can pretty much find all of my offerings mainly on my Instagram, which is at underscore Mallory Hasty. And then my website is just malloryhasty.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Mallory Hasty.
Thank you, Kay Folly. And we'll wait until the next collab.
Yes. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.